What happens when we begin to realize that the 200-year experiment we've called the American healthcare system has failed? Tune in to Awakened Wellness with Mylaine Riobe, MD, and join the conversation about how to heal our broken system to reverse our current health crisis. The entire world is looking for answers, and the truth is hidden in plain sight. Learn how spirituality, ancient traditions, and cutting-edge science are merging to create a new paradigm of wellness every Wednesday at 12 a.m. and 12 p.m. Eastern Time, with live video shows every first and third Wednesday at 12 p.m. Eastern Time, when you can call in and ask the questions that matter most to you.
And we're live.
Good afternoon. Welcome to Awakened Wellness. I'm your host, Dr. Mylaine Riobe. We'll be going on an eye-opening, mind-expanding adventure into disease prevention and wellness today. We'll be debunking myths and looking at how cutting-edge science helps corroborate ancient medical systems and traditions so that you and your family can live your healthiest and happiest life. So before we came on air, I was talking to Rachel and she asked me what fun topic we were going to talk about today. And I said, well, it's not fun, but it's hopeful. So today we're talking about post-COVID syndrome, and today is March 17th. And before we start, just want to wish everyone a happy and safe St. Patrick's Day. And so post-COVID syndrome is something that we're just learning about in terms of what it's being called. We've seen it before. We understand that after viral infections, people can have long-term consequences. For example, after an infection with human papillomavirus, you can develop cervical cancer. There are certain things that evolve from viral infections that we don't always connect the dots to. So today we're going to be talking about what is post-COVID syndrome, what can we do about it? And the good news is there's a lot we can do about it, although you won't hear about it on the news. And allopathic medicine will probably not talk about it very much because they don't have a mechanism really to have a better understanding of it. So for this, we have to go to the fields of integrative medicine and particularly traditional Chinese medicine. So we'll be doing that today. So before we get started, I just want to tell you that we are live here on Dream Vision 7 Radio. And our call-in number for you is area code 646-558-8656. Our meeting ID on Zoom is 883-695-3587. And we'd love to hear from you, so please call in and to raise your hand, just hit *9. And Rachel will get you right on so that we can have a great conversation today and really hopefully help people understand what it is we're going through right now and how we can start connecting the dots to really understand what the ramifications of this pandemic will be. Another thing I wanted to just briefly review from the last podcast that I did 2 weeks ago, just wanted to correct a quote that I made on statistics. What I intended to do was to quote the United States death statistics from the so-called Spanish flu of 1918. And instead I quoted world statistics. So I apologize for that. The end game is still the same. The point that I wanted to make was that despite the last 100 years of developing technology and vaccines and antibiotics, we still have gotten no further during this pandemic than we did 100 years ago. 100 years ago, we lost 675,000 Americans to the so-called Spanish flu. This year, we're at 550,000 or so and counting. And unfortunately, I think by the time we really get this pandemic under control, we will have probably sadly matched the death toll of 100 years ago. So the point was, we haven't gotten very far, and there are specific reasons for that, which we'll talk about as well. So post-COVID syndrome, what is it? So for those who survive this infection, we're finding out that there are lingering symptoms associated with it. the most common of which is fatigue. People report muscle aches, joint aches. People report continued shortness of breath and are developing lung diseases, liver diseases. There is brain damage occurring as a result of COVID. So people are experiencing also psychiatric disorders after COVID, memory loss, and heart disease. Palpitations, arrhythmias, which is an abnormal heart rhythm. So the question is why? Like, what's happening? The answers are always the same, whether you talk about why someone got COVID as opposed to why they can't get rid of COVID, right? So we make this assumption that when someone recovers from COVID, that they are actually recovered. And the truth is that they are not recovered. They are just out of the woods. And what happens with COVID is important to understand if we're going to understand what post-COVID syndrome actually is. So in traditional Chinese medicine, we understand that the reason we get an infection is because our immune system was weak to begin with. So if our immune system is too weak to defend us against an infection, that also means it's going to be too weak to actually kill the virus and rid us of it. And so very often, the understanding is that the virus stays within us. And the most famous infection that we see that in is herpes type 2, with the reactivations that people have from time to time, especially under times of stress. So we make this assumption that, oh, I'm recovered, therefore the virus must be gone. And that's not at all true. What has happened is your body has made 1,000 wrongs to equal a right so that you survived. And now it has all those wrongs going on at the same time. And your body does not like to be in distress. And so it will accommodate and it will find a way to calm itself down. It will find a way not to be so responsive, not to be so quote unquote overreactive to the infection. And it will settle into a latent stage. So the virus will settle into the body. The immune system won't be quite as triggered because your body understands that if it over triggers your immune system, you'll die. So it has a way of resetting itself so that you don't die, but you're also not well. So this idea that we have recovered from COVID is simply unfounded. The other problem we have in understanding that is our test methods are not very good. So we use these things called viral loads to look at viral infections. And they're fundamentally flawed because viruses don't live in our bloodstream, which is where we obtain the viral load from. A virus can't survive in the bloodstream. It's just using the bloodstream as a transportation highway to hijack its way into a cell. And once it gets inside a cell, it will then bind with your genetic code, your DNA, and that's how it duplicates itself. So a virus is not stable in the bloodstream. It's not going to want to stay there. And when we do these tests called viral loads, we're looking at blood levels of virus. And so we're looking in the wrong place, basically. So fundamentally, when we look in a place where the viruses don't stay, we'll have a mistaken idea that the virus is gone. But the truth is it's inside of our cells. And again, until allopathic medicine begins to understand that life happens inside your cells, not outside your cells, we'll keep missing that boat. In Europe, there are tests for intracellular viral loads. There isn't one yet for COVID, but I'm sure that they are knee-deep in developing one. So they understand how viruses work. And so they developed their tests in Europe, in Greece in particular, based on the understanding of viruses. And it's not that we understand how viruses work, but for some reason, our allopathic system just refuses to acknowledge that there's an intracellular environment that needs to be tested and looked at. And so we're going to get this false idea that we've, overcome COVID when we have not. And that's what post-COVID syndrome actually is. And so going back to how is it that we get infected, right? What does COVID do? So first you need a weakened individual, a weakened human being, someone who does not have have his or her defenses up and ready to defend against a virus, because a virus is the ultimate parasite. A virus isn't even actually technically alive. It hijacks your life, so to speak, by encoding itself into your DNA, and that's how it borrows life. That's how it's able to reproduce itself and spread. So you have to already be in a weakened state to get COVID. And again, unfortunately, we don't know how to define a weakened state in our allopathic model. We think that if we have not diagnosed you with a disease, that you're healthy. There's a big stretch between being healthy and having a disease that we completely ignore in our allopathic model, which is where integrative medicine and functional medicine, as well as traditional Chinese medicine, or any energy-based system such as Ayurveda live. They live in that gap between healthy and disease. And that's why they're better equipped really to deal with circumstances like a post-COVID syndrome. So you have a weakened host, the virus gains access through the nasal passages, through the eyes, potentially through the mouth, potentially, and it goes down into the lung. And what's special about COVID is it can go deep into the lung and access the body, whereas a cold, for example, or the flu, they access the body through the upper respiratory system. COVID can actually access it deeper down into the lung, which is why it causes such severe lung symptoms in the first place. So then it gets into your body through what's called the ACE2 receptors of the lungs and mucous membranes. And so now it's inside. So it has to find its way into cells. And what it does is it hijacks a red blood cell. A red blood cell are the blood cells that make our blood look red. Their red blood cells carry oxygen to all of the tissues and cells of your body. So when you breathe in your oxygen, it goes through the lungs, and then it gets into the red blood cell carries it. The way that a red blood cell carries oxygen is through the use of a protein called hemoglobin. Hemoglobin carries oxygen, and what makes the oxygen stick to the hemoglobin molecule is iron, which is a mineral. Iron is sitting on top of the hemoglobin, so to speak, and then it's like a little magnet and it holds the oxygen. And then that allows the oxygen to be carried everywhere in the body, to every single cell. When it gets to the cells that need that oxygen, the iron then releases the oxygen so that it's inside the cell where it needs to be used. So neither iron nor oxygen are just floating around freely in the bloodstream. They're attached to this hemoglobin molecule, which is then attached to the red blood cell. So what COVID does is it needs hemoglobin to reproduce itself, which is a brilliant move on its part and horrible for us. So it's an evolutionary, it's a really genius evolutionary thing for a virus to do, which has tremendously untoward consequences for us as human beings. So what it does is it actually breaks the hemoglobin molecule apart because it needs a very specific piece of hemoglobin called porphyrin. Porphyrin happens to be the part of the hemoglobin that has the iron on it, which holds the oxygen. And so when it breaks apart the hemoglobin molecule, it sends the porphyrin molecule free floating into the bloodstream, and then it separates the porphyrin from the iron and the oxygen. And that's where the danger of COVID lies. It is in the disruption of the hemoglobin molecule, which then makes the iron and the oxygen just free floating in your bloodstream. That's a dangerous thing to have happen, is to just have free oxygen and free iron. In particular, well, both are bad, but iron is extremely toxic. And that's why it's always on a protein. It's never just free floating, it's always bound to a protein. And that's the only way to keep iron safe in the human body, is to have it always bound to a protein. So as soon as it becomes unbound, it becomes a toxin. Oxygen has to be bound until it gets inside a cell. Oxygen, again, does not work in your bloodstream. It has to get into the cells, and that's where it actually works. The reason we breathe oxygen is to make energy from the food that we eat so that our body has energy available to do all the critical tasks that it performs for us, such as breathing and heart beating and thinking, moving, things like that. Everything, digestion, reproduction, all relies on oxygen mixing with the food that we eat being delivered to the cells so that the cells can perform those functions. So if oxygen is free floating in your bloodstream, that means it's not available to your cells. There's no mechanism to get free floating oxygen into a cell. And that was the reason why very early on last year, the doctors that were on the front lines treating COVID were in a panic because the ventilators were not working. Typically, when someone gets the flu or pneumonia, we can place them on a ventilator and basically breathe for them until they recover from the infection. That was not working with COVID because the problem wasn't that they couldn't breathe. The problem wasn't that they didn't have enough oxygen. The problem was that the oxygen couldn't get into the cell. And so no matter how much oxygen you pumped into a COVID patient, they could not breathe. They couldn't get the oxygen into the cell. And so that's why those patients were dying. Now we've modified how we use ventilators, and we've changed our protocols so that we can better support COVID patients now. But in the very beginning, the reason we couldn't support them was not because they were missing oxygen. They had plenty of oxygen. It's just that the oxygen couldn't get into the cells. So back to the iron molecule. And the iron molecule is what's critical to explain post-COVID syndrome. And thankfully, some scientists are starting to really look at this now. Post-COVID syndrome appears to be a type of iron overload. So again, iron is very tightly regulated in the human body because it's like playing with fire. So we need the iron because it carries our oxygen, but we have to keep the iron in check. Be very, very careful with it. Everything in the human body is potentially a double-edged sword, just like estrogen. So iron is a double-edged sword. We need it because it gives us tremendous advantage, but we have to be very careful with the use of it. And so the body has very clear recycling systems for iron. And when that recycling system breaks, all hell breaks loose, unfortunately. And that's what we see with COVID. Iron is extremely toxic, and it causes a massive inflammatory response in the body, which is what we have heard termed the cytokine storm, which has led to people's death, basically. The body is so panicked by free-floating iron that it overreacts, and it sends a tremendous immune response to get the iron out in some form or fashion. Unfortunately, there isn't a very good way to get the iron out once the mechanism is badly broken. And so what happens is the iron just settles into the cells, on top of the cells, in the tissues, and the body continues to have this just massive inflammatory response to iron, desperately trying to get rid of it, but it just simply can't. It becomes overwhelmed by the iron and the inflammatory response. And iron is a very, very small molecule, so it has no borders, really. It can pretty much get anywhere it wants. Anywhere your blood can flow, iron can be swept. So that's why we see post-COVID syndrome affecting just about any organ system in the body. The brain, the lungs, the liver. We haven't identified the gastrointestinal system per se, but it can access the gastrointestinal system. It can access the heart. Obviously the muscles, the joints, all these places are subject to iron overload and the massive inflammatory responses that occur there. And so that's why post-COVID syndrome happens in the first place. So in order to really successfully treat post-COVID syndrome, we need a mechanism to help the body rid itself of all this excess iron. And thankfully, there are some natural what we call iron chelators. And what a chelator is, it's almost like a little magnet. It's a molecule that will go and act as a magnet, and it will just hook onto iron or any heavy metal and just kind of drag it out of the body. So we have pharmaceutical grade chelators for iron, but there are also natural chelators for iron. Again, nature has the solution to every problem if we ask it, if we observe it, and if we respect it. And so there are things that we can do, which we'll talk about later on in the show. The problem with getting rid of iron in the body is we don't have a good test to figure out how much iron is in the body. In fact, we really don't have a test at all. We can find out how much iron is in the bloodstream through the use of serum transferrin levels or ferritin levels. Transferrin and ferritin are the proteins that are charged with carrying iron around in the body. Again, keeping it safe so it can be appropriately distributed when it's not sitting on a hemoglobin molecule. So we can use ferritin and transferrin as markers of iron in the bloodstream, but it's not a good marker. They are not good markers for iron storage inside of cells or in tissues. And we don't really have a commercially available test for that. In research, we have fluorescence techniques. For research purposes, we can look at a hormone that the liver makes called hepcidin, but it's only for research. It's not clinically available. So part of the problem with post-COVID syndrome is it's going to be difficult to recognize because you literally have to do a tissue biopsy to see if there's iron in the tissues that you're wanting to examine. So if you wanted to know if if there's iron overload in the liver, you have to biopsy the liver. If you want to know if it's in the brain, you literally have to biopsy the areas, the heart and all these other places, which obviously is not practical. So we run into this problem of how do we identify the cause of post-COVID syndrome when we don't have a means of identifying it? And that's where Chinese medicine comes in. Chinese medicine doesn't rely on any testing, and that's the beauty of it. And what's amazing about traditional Chinese medicine is that it's just simply so holistic that it doesn't matter who the offending agent actually is. They don't really have to know about COVID to treat COVID. And that's what's beautiful about traditional Chinese medicine. They have such an understanding of the body and how it responds to the environment and interacts with the environment that they can nail it down based on symptoms. For example, with the symptom of fatigue in post-COVID syndrome, if someone reports to you that they feel better when they move around, so they say, when I work out, I feel great. And then when I sit down, I feel terrible. Or when I first wake up in the morning after I've been laying in bed for 8 hours, I feel horrible. And it's only after I start to move that I feel better. We know that that's an excess condition. In other words, there's something trapped in the body. There's something obstructing energy flow in the body. So it could be heavy metals. It could be an iron overload situation. Now, we wouldn't know exactly what it was in the way. And it somewhat doesn't matter because the herbs that they use help the body to rebalance itself, regardless of what the offending agent is, so to speak. They have such a phenomenal way of determining if the offending agent is causing what they call dampness or wind or stasis, heat or cold. So once you do a really good symptom inventory in traditional Chinese medicine, you'll have a good idea of how to treat the client. And that's what makes it so powerful in the case of what we call curious or complicated diseases or diseases we don't really understand yet, such as COVID. So back to the fatigue, if someone notes that they are tired when they exert themselves, like I can't work out, I'm too tired, or I feel better if I take a nap, I feel better when I wake up in the morning, but then as the day goes on, I feel worse. That tells us that the fatigue is from a deficiency and not an excess problem. And that's important because post-COVID syndrome and COVID itself are always the result of some kind of deficiency in the immune system specifically. And there are so many factors in immunity that it's almost impossible to nail down where the immune system dysfunction is coming from. Is it coming from a gastrointestinal issue? Is it coming from a liver issue? Is it coming from a blood disorder? It's almost impossible to tell with testing, but it's not impossible to tell with traditional Chinese medicine. So they can identify which energy systems are involved in the weakened immune state and help correct it through the use of nutrition, lifestyle modification, herbal therapies, and acupuncture. So it's important to know, are you tired when you exert yourself, or do you feel better when you exert yourself? Same thing with joint and muscle aches, the other dominant symptom of post-COVID syndrome. It's the same. If your muscle aches are better when you move around, that tells us that there's something obstructing the flow of energy through the musculoskeletal system. Whether it's what in Chinese medicine is identified as dampness, which we would equate loosely with inflammation. We can tell if the inflammation is hot or cold based on symptoms. So if a joint is red and hot to touch, that's a heat condition. If it's not, it's either neutral or cold. And now if someone feels cold, then there's a coldness. And then you would confirm that by looking at the tongue and feeling the pulses. So it's not all symptoms based. The tongue and pulse also confirm what you think the pattern is, and also unveil unknown patterns that the symptoms may not be telling you about, so that you have a more complete treatment in Chinese medicine. So we can look at post-COVID syndrome in that respect and systematically then treat the excesses, the deficiencies, identify which layers of defense have been weakened, identify where the pathogen is. That's another thing that Chinese medicine is excellent at is finding out where is the pathogen, where did it settle? And that can also be symptoms based, and with examination, tongue and pulse, we can tell where the virus is lodged. There are 6 layers of defense in traditional Chinese medicine, and each layer has very specific symptoms that a patient would display that, again, you would confirm with the tongue and pulse assessment. And so I think Chinese medicine is going to be probably the most powerful system of medicine available to anyone who has post-COVID syndrome to recover. So we're going to take a little break now. And when we come back, we're going to talk more, of course, about post-COVID syndrome, what it is and what you can do about it, and some treatment options that are available. Thank you. We'll be right back.
What happens when we begin to realize that the 200-year experiment we've called the American healthcare system has failed? Learn how spirituality, ancient traditions, and cutting-edge science are merging to create a new paradigm of wellness on Awakened Wellness with Mylaine Riobe, MD. Tune in every Wednesday at 12 a.m. and 12 p.m. Eastern Time with live video shows every first and third Wednesday at 12 p.m. Eastern, when you can call in and ask Dr. Mylaine the questions that matter most to you. Dr. Mylaine is the medical director of the Riobe Institute of Integrative Medicine in Jupiter, Florida. For more information, visit RIOBE integrativemedicine.com. Dream Vision 7 Radio Network invites you in for this dynamic, forward-thinking show.
Join Dr. Bernie Siegel on Mind Health Matters every Thursday and Friday, 12 a.m. and 12 p.m. Eastern Time on syndicated Dream Vision 7 Radio Network. Bernie will draw from his inspirational personal journey, offering us special nuggets of his sacred wisdom weaved through his delightful stories. Listen in as Bernie reminds us to be fully engaged in life.
Ever wonder what it's like to have your own radio show? Well, wonder no longer, because you can dip into the radio airwaves by being host for the day on syndicated Dream Vision 7 Radio Network. It's a fabulous way to get your radio feet wet. It's an opportunity to market your business, modality, or book. Have a guest, mention a sponsor, and take callers. Or you may want to facilitate a lesson by going solo. It's up to you. Listeners can be online, mobile, in cars with Bluetooth, or listen through Amazon's Echo by asking, Alexa, play Dream Vision 7 Radio Network. For more details, go to dreamvision7radio.com and click on Host for the Day.
Omega Institute, offering workshops, retreats, and online learning dedicated to awakening the best in the human spirit. For over 40 years, Omega has seen more than 1 million people come through its doors to grow, learn, and find a greater sense of purpose. With over 350 workshops to choose from, Omega offers something for everyone. Located in Rhinebeck, New York, just 90 miles north of New York City, Omega's natural environment and quiet pace allow for extraordinary experiences to unfold. Learn more at eomega.org or call 877-944-2002. Again, 877-944-2002.
Delight your kids with an enchanting journey by reading the Paper Doll Kids children's book by Deborah Beauvais and Janine Sullivan. There's even a catchy tune, Kids for Love Song, produced by Bob Sherwood and sung by kids just like yours. The story weaves around 7 paper dolls flying around the world doing good deeds as they bring important attention to our endangered animal friends. There's even a magical ring with a universal message. Kids become interested in service projects, action through compassion, and planting seeds that nurture positive change. The Paper Doll Kids and Kids for Love Song are a production of the Kids for Love Project. Get the book now on Amazon Kindle and the song on CD Baby or iTunes.
This is Dream Vision 7 Radio Network, uniting mankind with universal love. Our shows are created from the heart, bringing each listener to a place of divine enlightenment. Breathe, relax, and enjoy. Let life flow.
And we're back.
Thank you, Rachel. Welcome back to Awakened Wellness. I'm your host, Dr. Mylaine Riobe. I'm a double board certified medical doctor in the fields of obstetrics and gynecology, as well as the exciting new field of integrative medicine, which I believe is the future of medicine and should be what we call primary care here in the United States and throughout the world. So today on St. Patrick's Day, we are talking about post-COVID syndrome. What is it and what can we do about it? The reason that post-COVID syndrome is going to become increasingly important is because of the vaccines that we do have available today. So the vaccines will be saving countless lives, especially for those at high risk of death from COVID. But because it does not actually prevent infection, we'll be dealing with a lot more post-COVID syndrome. And we won't be able to see the direct connections between COVID and what happens years after COVID. A striking example is actually former President Woodrow Wilson, who was the president during the last pandemic of 1918. He contracted the flu and was very ill and recovered. And within a year, he had a stroke and passed away. And they were reporting, post-influenza type syndromes back then, just as we are today with COVID. And so when things take a long time to evolve from a particular infection, we tend not to recognize the links. And so, for example, human papillomavirus causing cervical cancer, it takes years for that to evolve. And it's not immediately known. It wasn't until years after that the connections were made. And we also see the onset of diabetes after viral infections. We see the onset of autoimmune disorders after viral infections, as well as thyroid disorders. And because there's a bit of a lag between when it happens and when the infection happens and when the quote unquote complication happens, we don't always, connect the dots. And it's important for us to understand why that is. And it's because the human body is extremely resilient. It's not just gonna, pack up and leave over an infection if it can avoid it. It's going to stay and fight. And that fight comes at a cost, so your body is incessantly calculating risk to immediate survival. And it's always playing its cards based on immediate risk, not so much long-term risk. And so it will sacrifice something long-term for an immediate gain. always, because it understands that if you're dead, you're dead, and there's no later at that point. So in the example of cancer, for example, your body would prefer that you have cancer instead of a heart attack, because it understands that a heart attack is immediately life-threatening. If your heart doesn't beat, you die. If you have cancer, you die later. And so the body makes these types of choices for us on an ongoing basis that we really need to begin to appreciate if we're going to really get to the heart of cause and effect, right? Everything has every effect, every disease has a cause. And then if we don't actually treat the cause, the effects keep coming, and they just linger on, and they take longer and longer to happen. But because the cause is there, the effect is going to still be there. And so that's what's most critical, I think, for us to understand to really move forward. So we're not going to see immediate things from COVID. It's going to be 5 years down the road. It's going to be the increases of cancer. It's going to be the increases of Alzheimer's dementia. It's going to be the increases of strokes. And also, kind of curious diseases that don't have a name, so to speak, or curious symptoms, I should say, that don't have an actual name. So people will be evaluated, nothing will be found, and they'll be told that nothing's wrong. Meanwhile, they will be harboring COVID in their body, just not in an obvious way. So in order to deal with post-COVID syndrome, we have to do two things. We have to get rid of we have to do three things, actually. Get rid of the iron overload that's causing the immediate problem. Get rid of the virus, which is harbored inside the cells. And then at the same time, boost the immune system so that it can help. We can't surgically remove a virus from every single cell of the body. No matter how hard we try. At some point, the person's immune system has to be recruited to do the rest of the work. Otherwise, we don't ever get out of the ditch. And so identifying breaks in the immune system defense and repairing those things either through identifying gastrointestinal disorders to correct, identifying nutrient deficits to correct, identifying blood disorders to correct, or genetic predispositions to work around, whatever is identified as the cause of the immune system glitch, so to speak, needs to be corrected. The virus needs to be killed. So we have to devise a treatment method to kill viruses, to kill these viruses. The antivirals that we have don't work. We know that, we understand that. So we have to look at other systems of medicine that are antiviral to treat. And there's an herb that I use in my practice to prevent colds and flus. I've used it for years, and the Chinese have used it for thousands of years. And when COVID first came out, I had this conversation with several patients who were concerned about COVID with good reason. And so we gave them a bottle of these herbs to take with them. And they're not immune boosting herbs. They are herbs that you would take if you think you're coming down with something. We call it yin chow powder for short. It has a long pinyin name, but we call it yin chow. And the Chinese used it, and they didn't care if it was a cold, a flu. It didn't matter who the offending agent was, because the way that you defend the body was always the same. You open the body's pores and you mount defense to push the offending agent, whether it's a virus or a bacteria, out through the pores before it enters through the pores. So you have to start this herb really, really early in order for it to actually work. If the virus has already penetrated through the pores, then clearly that herb wouldn't work. So as I was researching for the show, I came upon a study that was done on yin chow powder. And what they did is they looked at all the active ingredients in this herbal formula. And it has about 10 ingredients, but it has about 30 active identified ingredients within the herbs themselves. And they noted just exactly how this thing works. And it's fascinating that it has antiviral properties, it has immune boosting properties, it has all the things that you would think would be necessary to prevent infection. And this particular study was actually looking at whether or not it would prevent COVID infection. And the conclusion was that it would. And we know that in Chinese medicine it would, because that's just what this herb does. It doesn't matter what the virus is. Now, you don't take this herb ongoing because it mobilizes your defense. So it's not an immune building herb, it's a mobilization herb. So you only want to take it for a couple of days if you think you're coming down with something. So it was really rewarding to see how this, this Chinese herb that predates COVID by thousands of years is effective against COVID, because the system of medicine that devised this herbal formula is so holistic, so comprehensive, that it doesn't matter what's coming at it. It always seems to have an answer. And so that was fascinating. And so there are natural remedies that help, and the little notes that I had just fell on the floor. So I'm going to be looking down a little bit at the backup notes. Let me just put them up. Excuse me 1 second. See if that one will stay up. So there's a long list of potential treatments. So I just wanted to make sure I had them at my disposal so I don't leave any out. And they're all foods, and again, I'm going to stress that what I'm offering here today is not medical advice. This is just general information for people. If you are actually suffering from post-COVID syndrome, it is critically important that you be under the care of a qualified physician in your area, or remotely, if you don't have a qualified physician in your area, but a board certified integrative medical doctor or a doctor of Oriental medicine would be your two best resources for post-COVID syndrome at this time, until more research is done in the allopathic community to see what they may have to offer. So this is not medical advice. When patients come to me for medical advice, we do a very thorough evaluation and examination, and we give them very specific, customized, personalized, supervised recommendations. So these are just general, just to let everyone know and be clear. But they're basically a couple different categories. The most broad is what are called phytochemicals. Phytochemicals have to do with light therapies, which is interesting. So fruits and vegetables, carry a lot of light. And so what's being shown about phytochemicals is there are many subcategories of phytochemicals, and they're found in fruits and vegetables, basically. And they're being shown to be what are called natural iron chelators. So you eat them, they go into the body, and they hook iron, and they kind of just gently, get it out of the body over time. And these studies are not new. They've been done over decades. So this isn't new based on COVID. This is what was already known for iron overload situations, such as hemochromatosis, which is a genetic iron overload problem that causes tremendous toxicity and disease for those who are impacted by this genetic disease. But basically, phytochemicals are the main category. There are a couple Chinese herbs that have been shown to be iron chelators. There are many more, but this was just what I could find studies for. Excuse me 1 second, I'm just going to grab some water. And then there were Ayurvedic herbs as well, a couple Ayurvedic herbs. So let me read them off. I don't know them all by heart, so I don't want to miss any. But the first category of phytochemicals are flavanols. And we find these in teas, most notably green teas and black teas. So drinking, green tea and black tea will help remove iron from the body in a natural way. And it's relatively safe. So when I say relatively, if you overdo things, even though they're natural, there will be problems. So you don't want to overdo anything. And again, you need guidance for this. This is not something really to do on your own. The second category is flavonones, and those are citrus fruits such as lemons and oranges, grapefruits. Flavones would be fruit skins, peppers, and leafy veggies. And then isoflavones, the most notable being soy. And again, with soy, it is allowed to be genetically modified in the United States, so please make sure that it's no GMO. Flavonols consisting of leeks, onions, and tomatoes. Anthocyanidins, and those would be berries, most notably cranberries. So cranberries are very notably iron chelators, natural iron chelators, which is very interesting. But any berry, blueberry, strawberry would be similar, but cranberries are noted to have the most significant impact. And then we have apples, and my favorite, chocolate and nuts. So those are a category of phytochemicals as well that will remove iron gently from the body. And lactoferrin, which is not a phytochemical, so that's the next one. Lactoferrin is a natural agent that will just, again, ferrin, it will bind to iron and it will remove it from the body. Turmeric or curcumin is very strongly iron chelating. And again, everything is in moderation, so you don't want to overutilize anything. Mucuna pruriens is another Ayurvedic herb that can be used, and it's also known to cross the blood-brain barrier, so it will go into the brain and work on the nervous system as well. And then Prycorrhiza is another one, and pycnogenol. Pycnogenol is a trademarked herbal that also is an iron chelator. And then we have Chinese herbs. So Scutellaria, or what's called Wang Qin in Chinese medicine, is an iron chelator, as well as Ligusticum, which is Gao Ben in Chinese medicine. And then we have quercetin. Quercetin was actually studied and compared to a pharmaceutical grade iron chelator and shown to be superior to the pharmaceutical grade chelator. So quercetin is a fairly aggressive iron chelator. So those are the main list of things that are used to just gently bring iron out of the body so that we can treat post-COVID syndrome. So when we come back, we'll wrap it up, take any questions that anyone may have, and just give you some more tips on how to deal with this unfortunate sequelae of the pandemic that we're experiencing. So we'll be right back.
What happens when we begin to realize that the 200-year experiment we've called the American healthcare system has failed? Learn how spirituality, ancient traditions, and cutting-edge science are merging to create a new paradigm of wellness on Awakened Wellness with Mylaine Riobe, MD. Tune in every Wednesday at 12 a.m. and 12 p.m. Eastern Time with live video shows every first and third Wednesday at 12 p.m. Eastern, when you can call in and ask Dr. Mylaine the questions that matter most to you. Dr. Mylaine is the medical director of the Riobe Institute of Integrative Medicine in Jupiter, Florida. For more information, visit RIOBE integrativemedicine.com. Dream Vision 7 Radio Network invites you in for this dynamic, forward-thinking show.
Edesia is a U.S. nonprofit dedicated to the dream of ending childhood malnutrition for millions of children around the world through the manufacture of Plumpy Nut and other nutrient-rich, peanut-based, ready-to-use foods. Edesia has already delivered life and hope to nearly 1 million children in over 26 developing countries. To find out how you can join Edesia's dream of ending childhood malnutrition, please visit edesiaglobal.org.
What if dreams can diagnose your life? What if we can meet the love of our life in dreams? Join host Kat O'Keefe Canavas, the #1 internationally best-selling author of Dreams That Can Save Your Life, written with Duke University medical doctor Larry Burke. Dreaming Healing is where we'll explore dreams, research, and interpret dreams from you, the caller. Dreaming Healing shows can be heard every Tuesday at 9 a.m. and 9 p.m. Eastern, with live shows on the first and third evenings at 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific Time on syndicated Dream Vision 7 Radio Network. Come live your dreams out loud with Kat.
Are you searching for a way to help create global change? Dream Vision 7 Radio Network's vision is to have an eclectic group of radio hosts dedicated to educating, enlightening, and helping humankind with positive messages and tools that enhance lives using different modalities and programs. If you would like to join our team and help illuminate the universe, call Deborah at 508-226-1723 or Deborah at dreamvision7radio.com.
This is Dream Vision 7 Radio Network, uniting mankind with universal love. Our shows are created from the heart, bringing each listener to a place of divine enlightenment. Breathe, relax, and enjoy. Let life flow.
We're back, Doctor. I had somebody ask me how to get a hold of you. I mean, it's just fascinating. I'm enjoying this greatly. But they asked how to get a hold of the doctor. Could you talk about that? Thanks.
Yes, absolutely. Our office number, we're here in Jupiter, Florida. We do remote visits as well. Our number is area code 561-244-5880. The name of the office is the Riobe Institute of Integrative Medicine. And our email is info at riobeintegrativemedicine.com. Riobe is spelled R-I-O-B as in boy, E as in Edward. So yeah, any one of those ways, we're here. So thank you for that. I'm not great at self-promotion, so thank you for the question. So in the last few minutes, just wanted to talk about, again, preventing COVID, because the vaccines are not known to actually prevent infection or transmission. They really are only designed to reduce the overwhelm of the healthcare system by preventing, death and hospitalization. And so that's important. We don't know if these vaccines actually prevent infection. We just know that they prevent death, and that is extremely important because everyone's life is valuable. And also, perhaps just as importantly, the overwhelm on our healthcare system of the past year. We were overwhelmed before COVID. And so this has been just an unbearable strain on our healthcare system. And so I think the biggest benefit outside of saving lives directly of these vaccines will be reducing the burden in the hospitals. And so those are the main two focuses of the vaccine. It's not actually to prevent infection. And so we don't even know if that's what they do. So the recommendations remain the same, whether you've been vaccinated or not. And that is to continue to wear your masks, socially distance, and wash your hands. One thing about COVID is it's wrapped up in this greasy envelope. And that's how it moves around in the world. And soap obviously breaks up grease, right? So that's why just the simple act of washing your hands with soap and water and taking a shower, if you've been out in the world, first thing you do is just hit the shower when you get home. COVID can't survive soap. So we have this idea of COVID as this big monster, this giant, soap will kill it. So it's a parasite, it's an opportunist. And so we have to exercise the same precautions post-vaccine era COVID as we did pre-vaccine era COVID. And also equally importantly is boost our immunity. Viruses cannot penetrate a strong defense, so that's known. We study that in medical school. It's well known, it's well studied. A robust immune system cannot be penetrated by a virus. It just can't. And even if one would, find its way in somewhere, if you have a robust immune system, it will be triggered in some form or fashion to hunt that virus down and kill it. It's only if you have multiple layers of defense that are down that a virus can take hold, duplicate itself, and overwhelm you. And that's the same for any disease, cancer, heart disease. The body has to be so badly broken for those diseases to take hold. And that's what I learned in writing my books, the most recent one being Faith, coming out on April 23rd, is the body has to really be broken to have a disease. And it has to be even more broken to die of a disease. So the body is extremely resilient, and it's due to, unfortunately, the last 100 or 200 years of just chiseling away at the human body with just the sheer volume of toxins to which we've been exposed and the stress to which we've been exposed. It's just kind of broken us in so many ways. And so we have to really fundamentally and foundationally rebuild ourselves through mitigating the impacts of stress, learning how to become somewhat stress-proof, so to speak, and then building the inside of the body so that it can raise its defenses when necessary. And that includes, again, I always go back to the gastrointestinal system because it's the root of everything that ails us. It has its root in the gastrointestinal system. So that really needs to be very well evaluated. And unfortunately, in our allopathic model, we just don't have the ability to do that. It's only in the integrative model, consisting of functional medicine and an energy-based system of medicine. Again, whether it's Chinese medicine or Ayurveda, it really doesn't matter. They're both very powerful and they work in very similar ways. But I can't stress enough how important it is that integrative medicine actually become primary care. Right now, primary care is the family doctor or the internal medicine doctor. And the focus of that branch of medicine is to diagnose and treat disease. It's not to prevent it. Primary care is prevention. So we have to put a system of medicine in place whose focus is preventing disease. And until we do that, we will continue to go around in these circles. We haven't gotten anywhere in 100 years. Pandemic of 1918, fast forward to 2020, 2021, we got absolutely nowhere. We just went around in a big circle because our focus didn't change. And so our focus needs to change. And so I hope that what you've heard today has been very helpful. I wish you continued health, wellness, safety. I send you many blessings, light, and love. And I thank you so much for being here with me today. And we'll be back in 2 weeks with another exciting topic. Maybe not fun, but definitely hopeful. Thank you.
Join us next time on Awakened Wellness with Mylaine Riobe, MD, to learn how spirituality, ancient traditions, and cutting-edge science are merging to create a new paradigm of wellness. Awakened Wellness airs every Wednesday at 12 a.m. and 12 p.m. Eastern Time, with live video shows every first and third Wednesday at 12 p.m. Eastern of each month. Meanwhile, you can join our Facebook page at facebook.com/Awakened Wellness and let us know what you'd like to discuss on future episodes. Dr. Mylaine is the medical director of the Riobe Institute of Integrative Medicine in Jupiter, Florida. For more information, visit riobeintegrativemedicine.com. This show is part of the Dream Vision 7 radio network.
This is Dream Vision 7 Radio Network, uniting mankind with universal love. Our shows are created from the heart, bringing each listener to a place of divine enlightenment. Breathe.